Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Stay Informed podcast. Today, we're talking about knowledge graphs, and I'm your co host, Tom Oshowitz.
And I'm Jessica Gonzalez.
You know, AI is a game changer in financial services, particularly in detecting and preventing fraud. It is proving its efficacy in identifying bank statement fraud by leveraging the concept of fraud and knowledge graphs. So, I'm going to talk to Jessica about some of the key developments that we're working on at Informed, and we have some really exciting things to share with you. So let's talk about knowledge graphs, Jessica. How do fraud knowledge graphs powered by AI differ from traditional methods in detecting and preventing bank statement fraud?
Yeah. I think one, fraud is a really great subject to talk about. It is always ever evolving. And I think that knowledge graphs is really addressing an issue that a lot of people have been historically asking for. It just was not an easy way to consistently measure, what is happening out there, just because no one really had the opportunity to have a true data consortium. Us in the auto industry, as well as in financial services, have always said that a data consortium is really imperative for us to do really our due diligence and ensure that the community is protected, as well as understand industry standards, as well as helping overall our organizations. However, there's just been the lack of opportunity to create some of those consortiums. So I think that Informed is really positioned in a place that we can give true value of knowledge graphs, because we have so many data elements and consortiums, and also approval from lenders to be utilizing and reporting fraud in an aspect that protects our consumers and our community. So how we do that with the knowledge graph is really kind of the thought process that Jessica has a bank statement. I submit that for a loan, and then, Tom comes around and he says, actually, I'm going to submit this bank statement. It looks just like Jessica's, but it has my name or my cell phone number on it. But all the transactions look almost identical. Maybe there's like a small, slightly change in those areas, but other than that, it is really what we're calling a synthetic bank statement, meaning it is a true bank statement, but it is not tied to the person that is submitting it. So really, because we have so many data elements, that's why the consortium is so important, that we're able to track this using knowledge graph and the AI technology.
Jessica, this is interesting because back in the day, in an earlier version of Tom Oshowitz, I was an identity fraud industry person, and we used knowledge graphs to find identity fraud. And the concept there was that you had clusters of behavior, like a traditional identity might have one SSN associated with a phone and maybe two addresses. But when you saw an identity in a knowledge graph with 16 SSNs associated to one phone number, you got worried, or 16 phone numbers associated to one name. So it seemed to me that it was really about anomaly detection. And so I'm just curious, like, is that what we're doing here with bank statements, that we're looking for, like, hey, this is what an ordinary bank statement looks like. And the idea that there'd be two bank statements that are weirdly similar is detected by our knowledge graph, or how does it work in the bank statement space?
Exactly, Tom. I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head. It's We're looking for those anomalies that, from a common perspective, that, as a human, you're looking at a ton of bank statements as a funder or somebody in originations, and you're not really able to even pick up on those anomalies. But in a greater aspect from the consortium, it's actually being able, there's no way a human could even detect it using those knowledge graphs, because we're looking at across the portfolios, across the industry, where I am, it's really of those fraud rings, right? So we're able to detect anomalies across a wide range of industries, across a wide range of areas and locations, which is something historically we've all needed and wanted, right? We just didn't have that access to. So exactly what you were doing with identity is now we're able to do that with transactions. So it can be all types of transactions, like you said. So deposits, ATM withdrawals, a number of things that are looking at these anomalies. And really, like I said, a human eye couldn't detect it. But even if you had all of those anomalies, you're also not able to see, what's being happening across the pond over there. And so now we have access to all of that information. So it's really empowering it by multiplications of knowledge and data.
I just want to drill down a little bit more on this concept of both the amount of data and what I would call the network effect. So it's great to have a knowledge graph and to find anomalies, but if you're doing anomalies of 3 documents, that's not that helpful. But if you have anomalies of 1,000 documents or 1 million documents, wow, that's so much more powerful. And secondly, you know, maybe you could describe, the type of data that goes through our system and how it's not only just that we have a lot of data, but we have a lot of different types of data. So maybe, can you tell the audience who may not know so much about how Inform works, the type of information that comes through our system and more about the consortium?
Yeah. So, I mean, really the impact is that when you look at all of this information, we're looking at all of the extracted fields. So what Inform does is that they get a document, you don't know what this document is, we're classifying it. So in the income realm, that could be, a military LES, it can be a pay stub, it can be a bank statement, it can be a number of documents associated to an entire application. And then whenever we get that and classify it, we also extract every variable component on there. So what Inform has done is created a master list of every document type and then variables that would we expect on those document types. Some of those variables are not always persistent there, but we are always looking for all of the data elements so that we can then utilize this in our knowledge graph. What that becomes is very, very powerful because we have seen, usually when we start with a lender, we've already seen about 13% of the portfolio, which is huge amount of information. What that means is that we have already seen, Jessica, if you go and apply here and we've seen your documents and we've seen what you've calculated your income as. And then if you go to apply in another area, we've also seen that from another lender. So 13% may not seem like a large, but if you think about all of the United States, what that number is, it's really, really huge.
And I guess one thing I'm also struck by is, how generative AI is increasing its sophistication, right? And so, what was a fraud? I'm back in the day, I'm dating myself, but I remember something called whiteout, right? And you would just sort of cross out something in a document, and things are a lot more sophisticated now. Maybe you could describe a little bit more about how, maybe in a fraud ring, how they might change a particular statement and how our technology detects it.
Yeah, I think Informed is actually really good use case for that, right? So when we first started looking at fraud and we had our dedicated machine learning engineers, the first thing that we went after was, and it was really necessary in the industry, specifically in auto, because there was a lot of fraudulent pay stubs. What that fabrication looked like is that somebody would go to paystub 123, download a pay stub for whatever reason they felt like they needed to, create a fraudulent misrepresentation of a pay stub. And so when we look at that, we had a lot of great success. We were able to, with very low false positive rates, 0.02%, be able to identify pay stubs that were utilizing template base. So that we felt really strongly that this is a really added value because across the industry, lenders were able to understand how much their fraud in comparison to other lenders. And really that statistic out there is not known because everyone defines fraud differently. Everybody initiates and report SARS and to the government entities in a different level based on their definition of fraud. So having an industry standard of a low false positive rate of a true definition of fraud across everyone is very helpful. But then we felt like, okay, we've solved this one piece, but we were not getting every aspect of fraud, right? We needed more heuristics. We needed to understand what else could be out there and also keep that false positive rate because we didn't want to turn away or create friction when not necessary. So really understanding how we can utilize not just the elements within the bank statements, but also the risk across the entire application is really, really beneficial, right? So like you said, we're looking at not only the fraud that we're saying this is a synthetic bank statement, but we're also saying what is the risk associated to this dealer? What is the risk associated to this organization with a number of risk attributes across all of the operational aspects that we did? Is this a clean deal? Is it more likely to be understated or overstated income? A number of different elements that we're looking at so that we can have a bigger picture so that we can still continue to fund good deals and we're turning away deals that are, misrepresented.
Two things that you said really struck me. One is this notion of, just the power of the network and that imagine if you're a lender and you see a bank statement and it looks great. And it's probably might even escape your detection. But if there's another lender out there that you wouldn't have access to has the exact same bank statement except for the name changed, there's no way you can figure it out, but something that we can figure out. So that's super exciting. And the other thing that you said that I'd love to explore a little bit more is this notion of low false positives. One of the things that is a problem in, for example, suspicious activity reports is you create so many false positives, like it's like dozens or 850 or 60 to 1, that the poor reviewer at the lender throws up their hands because they can't go through all the false positives. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about this concept of a low false positive rate.
Yeah, I think the false positive rate being low is really critical, right? Because they're the concept of the market changes. We want sometimes we're like having high risk opportunities where we're saying, you know what, we feel a little bit more comfortable. We want to say that we're going to open up the market. But whenever you say that it's low false positive rate, you can really understand how you want to put that odometer, right? So if you're saying this is where we're at, you know if you're going to go to the right or if you're going to go to the left, but you always have that center lane. And so I think that that's really important because we know market changes, we know fraud changes, we know trends change, but if you have a, really, center, you know where you can go right or left. And I think that's really critical. You often talk about accuracy and making sure that there is an accurate way of determining it. Same thing, right? We don't want to be creating models that are not consistent, and having that truth, that source of truth is really imperative for a lot of the things that we do around modeling.
So where would you say, Informed is in terms of the deployment of knowledge graphs? Are we, the first inning, the 10th inning, extra innings? Where are we at right now in, the deployment of fraud, and what can our customers expect?
Yeah. I think that, we have different fraud variations at this point. We have different versionings of the power of looking at fraudulent pay stubs from different aspects of it. Like I said, heuristics. We have one looking at it from the knowledge graphs as well as looking at it from pay stubs. We're ultimately a true fintech where we're solving customers, problems. And I think that right now we are truly solving the issues that we are being approached by our lenders. And what that is that right now they're saying, hey, we actually found a, knowledge ring, utilizing knowledge graphs. We actually found a ring of theft that is looking out at that they were supporting, utility bills and bank statements that were fraudulent, and then they were submitting them across the different United States. And no one would have really been able to do that. And really, I think the transformation of utilizing AI allows us to do that because at this point, the AI is doing a lot of the work too. It is really identifying suspicious behavior without us even having to point out. And I think so that really, to me, is saying, hey, those robots are working back there, and we're able to kind of make sure that they're performing the way that we want them to be performing, and that they're looking at the appropriate things, and that there's that co-pilot human judgment. But really, you want the AI to be finding those ideas and letting you know so that you're doing the research and the validation of it.
One thing that we discussed a little bit is the role of the human intuition and strategic thinking and how to address fraud issues. So we're developing all these technologies. There's obviously a lot of expertise from our clients who are working on fraud, to understand fraud. How do we connect our technology to the domain expertise that many of our clients have working on a daily basis with these issues? How does the human and the technology connect?
Yeah, I think, like I said, fraud is always changing, and so we have a fraud feedback loop. We make sure that the feedback from the lenders in real time is getting to our dedicated machine learning team that is focused on fraud. And I think that having somebody that is focused on it from a high level view of it, and then also not in the weeds of it. So we're getting all the great detail from the dedicated fraud teams at the lenders. They're giving it to our machine learning team, and then we're able to combine those both attributes and make sure that we're looking at it from a 50-foot level, as well as looking at it, really inspecting it closely to understand that. So I think that that's really critical, to be able to say that, hey, we have identified this fraudulent on a one-use case, but then we're also looking at it so that we can systemically stop that. So our lenders are really valuable. We have a really strong partnership with our lenders. And like I said, our whole use case is to solve their business problems. So I think that that's why we've been so successful to mature all of the products that we have, is because we're listening to what the lenders need and then solving that for them.
Bringing this back to knowledge graphs, I think one of the things and please explain to me just if I'm wrong, about knowledge graphs that's exciting is that it isn't a rule-based system, that it adjusts to the environment. And so that if there's anomaly today, we find there are going to be new anomalies tomorrow. And so I guess one of the questions is knowledge graph a way to keep pace with fraud strategies in the future, or how are we going to, as Informed or as an industry, address with the evolving threat of fraud?
Yeah, I think that, once again, you're correct. We have to start meeting everyone where they're at. And sadly, that means that we have to be more secure on how we approach fraud, and smarter about how we approach fraud. We've mentioned a lot of data points, and we know that humans are not capable of being able to do that, and especially not across different industries, different lenders, different organizations. So I think that we're meeting a deep necessity of not only bringing the technology, AI, knowledge graphs, deep sub knowledge graphs, but also understanding that the power of so many data elements. And I think that that is a necessary view of combining all of that, plus the human intuition, understanding the human element of it as well. And that's really where the power of AI in the financial security area.
So we've touched an amazing number of really interesting topics, and I think folks can tell that we at Informed are super excited about helping folks with fraud and taking on this really important challenge. In sum, would you have sort of a general takeaway for the audience, Jessica, about this topic?
I think, fraud is fun to talk about. Like I said, I think we could talk about it all day long. Even, whenever our data scientists come over and tell us like, hey, we just caught this. And, even the infographics of what we're showing of how cool it is to be able to say, hey, this is this and this is here. And we're connecting all those dots literally, is super exciting. So I think that if you don't have a fraud dedicated team, you need to get one. And then from the perspective of if you're not utilizing a partner that has access to a consortium, you also need to make sure that you're focused on having some of those attributes, because one-off fraud, we always think that it's not harmful to the industry, or it's like one of those crimes that doesn't really affect others, but it really does, right? It affects us across the industry, because banks and lenders have to increase their prices. You may have gotten away with one synthetic ID, but ultimately somebody else is going to have to pay for that whenever they stop paying that 18 months or 20 months, right? So we really just need to all do our due diligence and help and support our community.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much for sharing your insights for our audience on fraud and on knowledge graphs. And pretty much that's all the time we have for today. But until next time, stay informed.
Stay informed. Thank you.